Dream Travel to Italy. Chapter 1. Eli didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he was gazing out of his apartment window at the silent hum of the city lights, and the next, there was silence. A different kind. Crisp, like mountain air. He opened his eyes and found himself sitting beneath a sun-dappled olive tree, its branches swaying gently in a breeze that carried the scent of thyme and wildflowers. He was no longer in his room. This wasn't home. This was Italy. The hills rolled out like soft waves of green velvet, and far off in the distance, stone villages clung to the cliffs as if they had grown there themselves. Birds chirped softly in the distance. There was a golden hue to everything, like the world had been brushed with honey and dusted with the warmth of a fading sun. Eli stood, brushing a few olive leaves from his shoulders. His clothes had changed too, his hoodie replaced with a light linen shirt and well-worn sandals. It felt right, as if the land itself had dressed him for the journey ahead. A narrow stone path twisted through the grove, and with nowhere else to go and no reason to stay, he began to walk. As he wandered, he noticed little details, rustling lizards darting across warm rocks, the hum of bees in rosemary bushes, and terracotta rooftops peeking over cypress trees. It was peaceful, impossibly so. He felt as though the worries of the waking world were miles, no, entire dimensions, away. A weathered wooden sign appeared beside the path. It read Benvenuto a Toscana. Welcome to Tuscany. He smiled. Minutes or maybe hours later, time didn't seem to apply here, he reached a small hilltop town, all cobbled alleys and sunlit windows. The buildings were warm with age, and flower boxes spilled geraniums like laughter. An old woman sat knitting on her stoop. She looked up, as if she had been expecting him. "Ciao, Eli," she said with a knowing nod. "You're just in time for supper." He didn't ask how she knew his name. He didn't ask how he had arrived. In dreams, the need for answers fades like morning mist. She led him inside a stone cottage filled with the smell of bread, herbs, and stories. A long table was laid out beneath wooden beams, glowing in the soft flicker of candlelight. Bowls of olives, cheese, and fresh pasta lined the table like a celebration. Others joined, faces kind and unfamiliar, yet somehow comforting. They spoke in gentle Italian, occasionally turning to him with a smile or warm touch on the shoulder. Eli didn't need to understand the language to feel the meaning behind their words. This was welcome. This was belonging. As night settled, they stepped out to the terrace, the stars awakening one by one in the indigo sky. Below them, the valleys glowed with golden dots, faraway homes, quiet lives being lived. The old woman handed him a glass of deep red wine, and as he sipped, she said, "You'll travel far, Eli. But remember, every step is a return." He didn't know what that meant. Not yet. That night, Eli lay beneath the stars on a hammock strung between two olive trees. The wind carried the soft notes of a mandolin from somewhere distant, and his eyes fluttered closed. The journey had begun. Chapter 2, the scent of salt filled the air, and Eli awoke to the sound of lapping water. The olive groves were gone. So was the hilltop village. Now, he lay gently cradled in a wooden gondola drifting through narrow canals, the sky above a soft lavender. Around him rose old buildings, their foundations dipping into the water like tired giants resting their feet. Stone balconies leaned forward with flowering vines, and every window flickered with warm candlelight. Venice. A gondolier stood at the back of the boat, face half hidden beneath a smooth white mask. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat and a red sash at his waist. Without saying a word, he guided the gondola forward, the oar slicing the water in a steady rhythm. Eli sat up, the boat rocking gently beneath him. The water was so still it mirrored the buildings perfectly, as if the city floated on sky. Time seemed suspended, the world hushed except for the soft splash of water and the occasional coo of doves nesting above. They passed beneath arched bridges where couples whispered dreams to each other. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, casting golden circles that danced on the canal walls. Eli saw another gondola pass, its passengers wearing elaborate carnival masks, plumes and gold leaf and curved beaks that hid every expression. The City of Masks was not just a nickname, it was a spirit. The boat came to a stop beside a marble landing, and the gondolier gestured for Eli to step off. Before Eli could ask where he was or what to do, the gondola drifted silently back into the fog, vanishing like a breath. He wandered through the alleys, the narrow stone paths twisting unpredictably like veins through a living thing. Soft music echoed from somewhere, violin, accordion, laughter. He turned a corner and arrived in a vast square where masked dancers spun in circles beneath string lights. The square shimmered as if part of a dream within a dream. A woman in a golden dress approached him, her mask shaped like the sun. "Eli," she said softly, her voice like the wind through silk, "would you care to dance?" He hesitated, but only for a moment. Her hand found his, and together they joined the rhythm, spinning slowly beneath a sky so dark and vast it seemed to stretch beyond all known worlds. Around them, masked strangers clapped and turned, colors blending like brushstrokes on a canvas. As the music slowed, she leaned in and whispered, "Venice reveals what the heart hides. What is it you seek?" I'm not sure," Eli replied. She touched the center of his chest with a gloved hand. "You will be." Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she faded into the crowd. The lights dimmed, the masks stilled, and silence returned. Eli wandered until he reached the edge of the lagoon, where the city gave way to open water. The stars were reflected perfectly on the surface. He looked out, and something shimmered, an island in the distance, cloaked in mist. As he watched, a small boat bobbed near the shore, waiting. With calm certainty, he stepped aboard. The boat drifted onward without sails or oars, pulled gently toward the next dream. As the sound of bells chimed from somewhere in the distance, Eli closed his eyes. The journey continued. Chapter 3. When Eli opened his eyes, the sea was gone. In its place stood marble. Endless, timeless marble. Giant columns rose around him like stone trees, casting long shadows across sun-warmed stone. The scent of history filled the air, dust, cypress, and worn parchment. Overhead, gulls circled lazily, their calls echoing across broken archways. He was in Rome. But not the Rome of tourist maps and buzzing scooters. This was a Rome whispered into being by memory and myth. The streets were quiet, but alive. The ruins shimmered slightly in the golden light, not broken but suspended, like the city was dreaming of its own past. Eli walked slowly through the forum, the worn stones beneath his feet warm and smooth. Statues lined the path, some headless, others faded, but all grand. He could almost hear them speaking in ancient tongues, voices like wind and thunder. He passed under an archway that read SPQR, and the letters pulsed for a moment, as if they recognized him. A guide appeared, a man in a toga, with sharp eyes and a kind smile. "You walk through the bones of empires," he said, gesturing to the vast ruins. "But bones remember. Touch them, and they speak." Eli followed him through winding streets, where ancient columns leaned against modern cafes, and stray cats basked in sunbeams like Roman nobles reborn. They reached the Colosseum, half-shadowed in the late afternoon light. Eli stood in awe, the arena stretching high above him like a giant's crown. The guide's voice turned solemn. "Here, dreams of glory met reality. And still, it stands." Inside, silence filled the vast space. Eli imagined the roar of 1,000 spectators, the thunder of hooves, the clash of iron. But beneath that noise, he sensed something deeper, a stillness. A reminder. That even greatness passes. That everything grand was once a thought, a whisper. "Grazie," Eli said, smiling. "You're welcome," she replied in perfect English. "Rome remembers everyone who passes through. Even you." "How do you know me?" he asked. She just shrugged and ran off, disappearing behind a hedge. The sun was sinking now, casting long shadows that made the buildings look even older. Yet nothing felt decayed. Rome, in this dream, wasn't a relic. It was eternal, ever transforming, ever watching. As Eli walked toward the Palatine Hill, the earth beneath his feet began to hum. Not a sound, but a pulse. Like the heartbeat of time itself. He climbed, and at the top, he turned to see the whole city unfurl below him, domes and rooftops, spires and fountains, ruins and roads, all blending into one timeless tapestry. The guide turned to him and said, "You seek meaning. But meaning is not in the monuments. It's in the quiet between steps." Eli nodded. He didn't fully understand yet, but his heart did. The last rays of sun slipped behind the distant horizon. A warm breeze wrapped around him like a cloak. Somewhere below, the fountains of Piazza Navona began to sing their watery lullabies. As Eli closed his eyes, the city pulsed softly, a lullaby in stone. He was ready for what came next. Chapter 4. Eli awoke to the smell of warm bread and paint. He found himself standing in a quiet street lined with amber-hued buildings, their shutters cracked open to let in the morning sun. The cobblestones beneath his feet were wet from an early rain, but the skies above were clear, a soft blue canvas brushed with streaks of rose and gold. He had arrived in Florence. The city felt like a whisper of music made visible, everything carefully placed, harmonized. As he wandered, Eli passed artisan workshops where sculptors carved marble into delicate fingers, and tiny cafes where older men sipped espresso as if time had no demands. Church bells rang gently through the air, not loud, but resonant, like an invitation to stillness. He followed a winding path toward the river, where the Arno sparkled like liquid glass. Bridges arched over it, most notably the Ponte Vecchio, a centuries-old corridor crowded with jewelers and golden trinkets. The bridge gleamed in the morning light, a necklace strung across the water. A young man stood at the center of the bridge, painting furiously, canvas propped on a crooked easel. His curls were wild, and splashes of color marked his fingers and clothes. "You've come at the perfect moment," the artist said without turning. "The light is just beginning to bloom." Eli watched the man's brush dance across the canvas, one stroke, then another, capturing the city not as it looked, but as it felt. Warm. Alive. Eternal. "Florence doesn't paint with colors," the man said, pausing to wipe his hands on his apron. "It paints with light. See for yourself." The artist handed Eli a folded map, blank at first glance, but as sunlight touched the paper, faint lines shimmered to life. Streets. Towers. Gardens. Paths of wonder. And glowing softly in the center, Il Duomo. Eli followed the trail, cool. Sacred. Timeless. Sunlight poured through stained glass windows, painting the marble floor with color. As he looked up at the inner dome, he saw painted scenes of heaven and earth, angels and stars, light and shadow. He felt so small. And yet, infinite. A voice echoed from beside him. To build something eternal, one must begin with wonder. Eli turned to see a woman in a simple white dress, her eyes reflecting the same colors as the windows. "You are collecting pieces," she said gently. "Each place leaves something inside you. Don't forget to look within." She placed a small item in his hand, a glass pendant, shaped like a tear, catching the light with every hue of sunrise. "For the dark places," she whispered. He nodded, unsure if he was still awake. As dusk fell over Florence, Eli climbed the hill of Piazzale Michelangelo, where the entire city stretched before him. Rooftops, spires, the river, the dome. All glowing beneath the painted sky. The artist from the bridge was there again, still painting. "Did you find the light?" he asked. Eli looked out and felt it, not on the skyline, but in his chest. A quiet radiance. "I think it found me," Eli replied. And as the city dimmed and stars blinked awake, Eli leaned back in the warm grass, the pendant glowing faintly at his neck. Sleep found him like a final brushstroke. Chapter 5. The scent of lemon blossoms drifted on the breeze as Eli opened his eyes to soft waves brushing against stone. He was standing on a balcony carved into a cliff, overlooking a turquoise sea that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Below him, pastel-colored houses cascaded down the mountainside like petals spilling into the water. This was the Amalfi Coast. Warm air touched his face, salted and sweet. To his right, bougainvillea vines climbed the walls, their deep magenta flowers vivid against cream stucco. To his left, a narrow stairway curved downward, inviting him into the heart of a sunlit village. He descended. The path wound between homes painted in cheerful shades of coral and gold, their doors wide open, letting out the sounds of clinking dishes and distant singing. Life here didn't move fast. It meandered, like the stairways, like the waves. He passed a small shop where an old man was arranging lemons the size of grapefruits into a wooden crate. "Buongiorno," the man called out. "A gift from the sun, these lemons. Take one. They bring clarity." Eli accepted the offering, the fruit warm in his hand and fragrant like summer. He continued downward until the village opened to a quiet square, where a woman with silver hair served drinks under an orange tree. "Sit, traveler," she said, placing a glass of chilled limoncello in front of him. "You've been walking far. The sea teaches us how to rest." Eli took a sip. It was sweet, then sharp. Like a memory that stung before it soothed. He sat in silence as life unfolded around him, children chasing pigeons, an artist sketching rooftops, waves folding softly into the marina. And above it all, the cliffs stood tall and patient, like time itself was leaning against them. Later, he wandered toward a path carved into the mountainside. It was quiet now. The village slowly gave way to pine trees and terraces of vineyards. The air cooled, and the distant hush of waves was joined by birdsong. He came upon a small chapel, its white facade tucked into the stone like a secret. Inside, candles flickered beneath a mosaic of stars and seashells. A woman knelt at the altar, then turned to him with eyes full of calm. "You are not lost," she said softly. "You're unraveling." Her words settled into him like a tide coming in. "Rest here," she continued, gesturing to a bench by the window. "Let the sea speak. It knows things even the stars forget." Eli sat. From the window, he saw the coastline stretch like a sleeping dragon, villages glowing softly against the hills. The sun dipped toward the horizon, dyeing the sea in molten gold. The waves whispered secrets he couldn't quite understand, but didn't need to. He took the lemon from his pocket and rolled it between his palms. Something about its simplicity felt profound. A fruit. A moment. A breath. As twilight fell, the village bells rang out, a lullaby for the coast. Eli closed his eyes, the ocean's rhythm syncing with his own heartbeat. And once again, the dream pulled him onward. Chapter 6. The sun rose softly over the sea as Eli opened his eyes to a sky streaked with blush and amber. He was perched on the edge of a high cliff path, surrounded by the scent of morning dew and jasmine. To one side, terraced vineyards rippled down the mountainside in green waves. To the other, the Mediterranean shimmered like glass, calmly stretching far beyond where sight could follow. Far below, 5 villages clung to the coastline like jewels sewn into the hem of the earth. Buildings in hues of rose, saffron, lavender, and seafoam leaned into one another, their colors glowing in the soft light. This was Cinque Terre. Eli stood, the gravel beneath his sandals crunching lightly. A wooden sign beside him pointed to the Sentiero Azzurro, the blue path, linking the 5 towns by foot. There was no one else in sight. Only birdsong, the occasional rustle of vines, and the rhythmic whisper of the sea. He began to walk. Each step was easy, unhurried. The trail wound past lemon groves and stone walls, occasionally ducking into shady tunnels of olive trees. The silence wasn't empty, it was sacred, filled with quiet stories carried on the wind. He reached the first town, Rio Maggiore, as it was just waking up. Fishermen hauled nets from sleepy boats. Laundry flapped from balconies like flags of everyday life. A child laughed, chasing a cat around a sun-warmed alley. No one asked who he was. He was simply part of the morning. He bought a fig tart from a woman with a basket and ate it slowly as he watched the boats bob gently in the harbor. Then, without needing to decide, his feet led him to the next town, Manarola. Here, time slowed even more. The buildings were nestled tighter, the cliffs steeper. A narrow path led him to a ledge where lovers had carved their names into the stone. He traced the worn initials with his fingers. There, on the rail, was a small rusted padlock with two names scratched in, Amato e Luz. Someone had loved here. Deeply. Quietly. Forever. Further along the trail, a stone bench overlooked the sea. A man sat there, sketching with charcoal on rough paper. He didn't look up as Eli approached but spoke softly. "People come here to connect," he said. "With others. With the sea. With themselves." Eli sat beside him. They watched the light shift on the water, creating golden paths that led to nowhere in particular. The man continued, "Sometimes we think we're broken, when really, we're just scattered. Walking helps you find the pieces." Eli nodded, understanding more with each silent mile. He continued along the cliffs, the villages unfolding like chapters in a peaceful story. Corniglia, perched high above the sea like a secret, Vernazza, full of flowers and quiet song, and finally, Monterrasso, where the beach stretched wide and the mountains exhaled into the horizon. By the time the sun dipped toward the waves, Eli had walked through all 5 villages, but what he carried was more than distance. It was presence. Stillness. A sense of being part of something simple and enduring. He sat on the rocks by the shore, waves brushing against his feet. Nearby, someone had left a line of stones balanced one atop the other, each a little miracle of gravity and trust. Eli smiled. He added one more stone to the top. It held. The day faded into indigo. Stars blinked into place, reflected in the tidal pool beside him. With the rhythm of the waves lulling his mind, he let himself drift again, not away, but inward. The dream continued, quietly stitched with light and sea. Chapter 7. Eli opened his eyes to a soft, golden mist curling over the surface of a still lake. The air was crisp, touched with morning chill and the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke. A single boat glided across the mirror-smooth water, leaving behind the gentlest ripple. Around the lake, emerald hills cradled sleepy villages and sun-dappled villas with terracotta roofs. He had arrived at Lake Como. Eli sat on the edge of an old stone dock, his reflection rippling beneath him. Above, the mountains held their breath, the world wrapped in an almost sacred silence. Somewhere nearby, a clock tower chimed, once, twice, 3 times, its sound echoing across the stillness. Then, the faint ticking. He turned to see an old man sitting on a bench nearby, working intently on a pocket watch. Tools were laid out carefully beside him on a velvet cloth. Dozens of other watches, some antique, some modern, some fantastical, hung from a tree branch above like silver fruit. The man didn't look up. "Time behaves differently here," he said, his fingers adjusting a gear no larger than a grain of rice. "Some moments stretch like summers. Others vanish before you even feel them." Eli approached. The man handed him a watch. It wasn't running, its hands frozen at 11:11. The glass face was slightly cracked, but through it, Eli saw not gears, but images. Flickering memories. A table in Tuscany. A masked dance in Venice. Painted light in Florence. Laughter by the Amalfi Cliffs. Quiet steps in Cinque Terre. "It shows you what you carry," the man said, voice soft as the lapping water. "But not what's coming." Eli held the watch to his ear. Silence. "Time waits here," the old man whispered. "For you to breathe. So Eli did. He wandered the lakeside path, through gardens blooming with azaleas and roses. Butterflies drifted between the petals, and swans glided over the lake like whispered thoughts. Locals greeted him with warm smiles and soft nods, as if they recognized the quiet in his eyes. He found himself drawn to a small cafe shaded by weeping willows. The waitress brought him a pot of chamomile tea without asking. On the saucer was a single shortbread cookie, shaped like a clock. "Everyone has their own hour," she said gently. "You'll know when it's yours." He sat there a long time, watching time itself slow to a hush. Couples strolled past arm in arm. A dog napped in a patch of sun. A child floated a paper boat in a fountain. No rush. No worry. Later, as twilight painted the lake in rose and violet, Eli returned to the watchmaker. The man handed back the pocket watch. Its hands now moved, slow and steady, ticking forward with a sound like a soft heartbeat. "You've begun to feel it," he said. "The now. What am I supposed to do with it?" Eli asked. "Hold it," the man replied, "but don't grip too tightly. Let time pass through you, not around you." Eli slipped the watch into his pocket. It pulsed faintly, warm, alive. Night fell gently over the lake. The stars reflected perfectly on the surface, like a second sky below his feet. A small ferry waited at the dock, its lantern glowing like a firefly in the dark. Without hesitation, Eli stepped aboard. The lake shimmered goodbye. And in the stillness, a single moment unfolded endlessly, whole and complete. Chapter 8. The hum of crickets greeted Eli as his eyes opened to the scent of pine, sage, and warm earth. He was surrounded by rolling hills blanketed in forest, fields of sunflowers bowing gently in the breeze, and sleepy stone farmhouses rising like secrets from the land. This was Umbria, the green heart of Italy. Above him, the sky was deep and endless, dotted with drifting clouds that cast slow-moving shadows across the valley. Everything here moved gently, like a lullaby held in soil and leaf. He began walking, his feet finding a dirt path that wound through olive groves and tall cypress trees. Birds called softly from the branches. A nearby stream whispered beside him, its waters so clear they shimmered like glass over pebbles. At the edge of a hill, Eli spotted a town tucked among the slopes. It was small, built of weathered stone, its rooftops rust-colored and moss-softened. Bells rang from a chapel tower, not to call, but to remind. Time here wasn't a march. It was a quiet rhythm, like the breath of the land itself. As he entered the town, a woman with sun-dusted skin waved from a wooden stall lined with baskets of mushrooms, honey, and dried lavender. "You've come for the lantern," she said, smiling. Eli tilted his head. "What lantern?" Her eyes twinkled. "The one you carry but haven't yet lit." She handed him a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside was an old brass lantern, dented but beautiful, with intricate carvings of vines and stars. It was empty, no flame, no wick. But somehow, it felt full. "Where do I light it?" he asked. She simply pointed upward. He followed a winding path through the village and up a steep slope where the forest grew thicker and the air cooler. Along the way, he passed painted shutters, laundry fluttering in silence, and a single child drawing suns with chalk on the stones. At the hill's crest stood an ancient stone monastery, worn by time but glowing in the golden hour light. Ivy crept along its sides, and the scent of rosemary hung in the air. Inside, it was quiet. No monks. No chants. Just silence thick enough to feel. He wandered through a long hall until he reached a courtyard open to the sky. There, in the center, sat a small fire. No fuel. No smoke. Just light. It flickered with colors he'd never seen, blue, violet, gold. As Eli approached, the lantern in his hands warmed. He knelt, held it near the flame, and watched as it slowly caught, not with fire, but with glow. A quiet, living glow that pulsed like a heartbeat, like memory, like hope. The lantern hummed softly in his hands. Not loud, but enough. A voice spoke, not aloud, but inside him. The light you seek is not for the path ahead. It's for the path within. Eli stood, holding the lantern close. Its glow illuminated more than shadows. It revealed thoughts he hadn't faced. Feelings he hadn't named. Longings he hadn't admitted. He didn't run from them. As night fell over the Umbrian hills, he walked back down to the village, the lantern swinging gently by his side. In its glow, every stone seemed warmer, every shadow gentler. The townspeople smiled as he passed. The woman at the stall gave him a small nod. "You've lit it," she said. "Now keep it lit." Eli reached a small inn near the stream, where a room waited, candle already flickering on the table. He set the lantern beside it. Both flames danced together, one from the world, one from within. As he slipped into bed, the air outside thick with the scent of herbs and night, Eli felt something shift. A kind of peace that came not from finding answers, but from being still enough to hear the questions. And once more, he dreamed forward. Chapter 9. Eli stepped into a city of soft stone and starlit balconies. The air was velvet, warm, perfumed with night blossoms and the faint sweetness of wine. Verona greeted him with the hush of late evening, its streets lit by old lanterns casting gold halos on worn cobblestones. The city shimmered like a memory half remembered, both ancient and alive. He stood before a stone archway carved with roses and script. Above it, in delicate cursive, the words, "Benvenuto al Teatro del Cuore." Welcome to the Theater of the Heart. Beyond the archway, the city unfolded in quiet elegance, shuttered windows, ivy-laced balconies, the faint hum of a violin echoing through a nearby square. Couples strolled slowly, fingers intertwined, their voices soft as lullabies. Here, Verona did not shout its romance, it whispered it. Drawn by something unseen, Eli turned down a narrow alley and entered a courtyard overgrown with vines and quiet magic. There, on the far wall, love letters had been tucked between the stones, hundreds of them. Some faded, some fresh, written in every language, each sealed with hope. He stepped closer. One note fluttered down like a leaf and landed at his feet. It read simply, "Love does not wait to be understood. It asks only to be felt." A gentle voice behind him said, "Even the heart gets lost sometimes." He turned to see a woman seated beneath a pomegranate tree. Her dress was soft, her gaze thoughtful, her hands cupping a candle that glowed without wind. "Who are you?" Eli asked. She smiled. "A reflection of something you once believed in." She stood and walked toward the center of the courtyard, where two old marble benches faced each other like patient listeners. "Verona remembers lovers," she said. "But not all love is about another. Sometimes it's about returning to yourself." Eli sat beside her, and silence settled between them, not awkward, but full. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a weathered book of sonnets. "Words like these don't last because they're perfect," she said, tracing a line with her finger. "They last because they ache." He listened as she read a passage aloud. The words floated in the air, lingering like candle smoke. He didn't try to memorize them, he let them move through him, softening corners he hadn't realized were hard. Later, they wandered through Piazza del Erbi, where the market had long closed but the spirit of trade and tale remained. A musician played under a lamppost. A couple danced slowly, shoes barely lifting off the stones. A fountain bubbled like laughter in the corner. Eli and the woman paused at a balcony. Familiar. Famous. It was Juliet's. Lit from below, the balcony looked less like legend, more like longing. A place not of fairy tales, but of feeling. "I used to think love needed to be loud," she said. "But maybe it's more like this." "Quiet?" Eli asked. "Present," she answered. As the stars brightened overhead, the woman handed him a folded page from her book. A poem, unfinished. Write your own ending, she said. And then, she faded into the starlight, like a breath exhaled from a dream. Eli stood alone beneath the balcony, heart open in a way he hadn't expected. He unfolded the paper. The final line was blank. He wrote nothing. Not yet. Instead, he looked up at the sky, at stars as ancient as Verona's stories, and breathed in a truth beyond words. That night, he slept beneath the trees, with the soft hush of sonnets rustling in the leaves and the moon watching silently above. Chapter 10. Cold kissed Eli's cheeks as he opened his eyes to the scent of pine and snow. The landscape around him was stark and breathtaking, a jagged crown of pale mountains stretching into the sky, their peaks brushed in white and gold. Shadows pooled in the valleys, while sunlight danced across icy ridges. This was the Dolomites. The world here was quiet in a different way. Not gentle, but vast. Every breath felt cleaner. Every sound, wind, bird call, the soft crunch of snow, was amplified by the silence. Eli stood at the edge of a wide alpine meadow. Tall larches bowed in the wind. Far above, an eagle circled like a sentinel. A narrow trail wound upward between sharp cliffs and frozen streams, and something in his chest stirred. Not fear. Not urgency. But reverence. He began to climb. Hours, or what felt like them, passed in stillness. The higher he went, the thinner the air became, yet his steps grew lighter. The lantern from Umbria swung gently at his hip, glowing faintly even in the cold light. It gave no warmth, but somehow, it steadied him. Midway up a frozen path, he met a man tending a small fire beside a wooden shelter. His coat was stitched from furs and feathers. His beard was silver, his eyes sharp and kind, like someone who had watched many winters come and go. "You've come far," the man said, offering him a seat by the fire. "I think I'm still going," Eli replied. The man nodded. Mountains don't give answers. But they strip away everything that isn't one. They sat in silence for a time, watching the fire crackle, listening to the wind run its fingers through the trees. The man handed Eli a small piece of obsidian, smooth and black, carved into a spiral. "Hold this when you reach the summit," he said. "It shows not what's ahead, but what's beneath." Eli took it, feeling its cool weight in his palm, and continued upward. The trail narrowed. Snow deepened. Clouds brushed the cliffs like drifting thoughts. Just as his legs began to tire, the path opened into a high plateau, white and endless, with a single stone structure in the center. A circle of monoliths. He stepped inside. No roof. No doors. Just open sky above, and stone all around. In the center was a pedestal, dusted with frost. Eli placed the obsidian spiral on it. At first, nothing happened. Then, the wind shifted. The clouds parted. Light poured down from above like a spotlight from the heavens. The spiral glowed, and the lantern beside him pulsed brighter. Voices rose, not in words, but in feeling. "You are more than the places you've been. You are the thread that ties them. Not just a traveler, but a vessel. A mirror. A maker." Eli closed his eyes. He saw every place again, Tuscany's fields, Venice's canals, Rome's ruins, the quiet of Florence, the cliffs of Amalfi, the lantern in Umbria, the unfinished poem in Verona. And beneath them all, himself. Whole. Quiet. Real. When he opened his eyes, the wind had stilled. The light had faded. But he felt no cold. Only clarity. He descended the mountain slowly, watching as the world below expanded like a painted scroll. The firekeeper was gone, but a warm mug of something spiced sat beside the shelter. A final gift. Eli drank deeply, then continued onward. The Dolomites receded behind him, towering and eternal, their silence echoing with truths too vast for words. Chapter 11. When Eli opened his eyes, the hush of mountains had been replaced by a different rhythm, quicker, pulsing. A city's heartbeat. The gentle thrum of footsteps on pavement, bicycles gliding by, the distant ring of trams. But even here, the dream was softened. The sounds were not loud, they were layered, warm, and woven like threads in a rich tapestry. This was Milan. Skyscrapers of glass stood beside palaces of stone. Fashioned marble kissed weathered brick. 1,000 years of ambition moved alongside the present moment, and yet, something still waited in stillness. Eli walked through wide avenues and narrow alleys. There was beauty in everything, window displays lit like art, children feeding pigeons in sunlit plazas, an old man sketching with charcoal outside a library. Milan moved, but it didn't rush. Eventually, he reached the Duomo, a great cathedral of spires and lace-cut stone. It rose like a frozen flame into the sky. But today, it felt quieter. People gathered outside, watching as soft petals fell from nearby trees, blown gently by the spring wind. Inside, sunlight poured through stained glass, tinting the silence with color. Eli stood beneath the vaulted ceilings, listening, not to sermons, but to breath. His own. The stillness of others. The long, low note of a single bell. In one of the side chapels, he noticed a small door tucked behind an iron gate. It was open. He stepped through. Beyond the door was a garden, hidden within the stone. Ivy curled around archways. A pond rippled beside marble statues. Orange trees leaned into one another like old friends. It was untouched, unseen by the busy world outside. A sanctuary. He sat on a bench beside a bush of blooming lavender. The air was thick with fragrance. Insects buzzed lazily. The city was still just beyond the walls, but here, it felt like it had paused to breathe with him. A woman in a long coat and canvas satchel entered the garden, walking slowly. She carried a notebook, its cover worn from travel. When she saw Eli, she smiled and sat beside him. "You've come far," she said, echoing the words he'd heard before. But her voice held a tone different from the others, familiar, almost like his own. "I think I've been collecting pieces," Eli said softly. She nodded. "And now you're beginning to see the shape they form." She handed him the notebook. Inside were sketches of every place he'd been, done in charcoal and watercolor. Pages of Tuscany's fields, Venice's masks, Rome's arches, the hills of Florence, the cliffs of Amalfi, the lantern from Umbria, the stars of Verona, the mountains, the lake. And each image was accompanied by a single word. Presence. Wonder. Stillness. Return. He flipped to the last page. Blank. "You'll fill it," she said, standing slowly. "Not with places, but with what they've made of you." He looked up, but she was already gone, fading through the archway like a shadow at dusk. As the light began to dim, Eli sat quietly. He closed the notebook. He didn't feel rushed to write. The moment didn't ask for that. It only asked him to be here. For a long while, he remained in the garden. When he finally stood to leave, he noticed something glowing faintly at the edge of the pond, a small silver key resting on a stone. He picked it up, and somehow, he knew where it belonged. The journey was nearing its return. Chapter 12. The scent of salt and smoke filled the air as Eli opened his eyes to the southern breeze. He stood on a rooftop in Naples, the city sprawling below him in a symphony of color and life. Rooftops stacked like sun-baked puzzle pieces. Church domes, laundry lines, winding alleys. Mount Vesuvius loomed in the distance, silent but mighty, holding centuries of untold stories in its shadow. The key from Milan weighed gently in his pocket, cool, solid, and whispering with purpose. This city moved like fire and music, wild, honest, alive. Horns honked below, children chased each other between fruit stalls, and motorbikes wove through the chaos like dancers. It was raw, unpolished, real. Eli descended narrow staircases, passing chipped walls painted with saints and graffiti. Art, in Naples, was part of the noise. He wandered toward the Quartiere Spagnoli, where colors burst from balconies and every corner held the scent of fresh dough and espresso. A street musician played a mandolin with closed eyes, his song rising like a prayer above the noise. Eli dropped a coin into the case, and the man paused mid-note. "You carry a key," he said without looking. "But do you remember the door?" Eli hesitated. He didn't. The musician gestured toward a narrow alley lined with candles and crumbling brick. "It's down there. But only if you walk slowly enough to see it." Eli obeyed. As he moved deeper into the alley, time softened. The walls closed in like a tunnel of memory. Candlelight flickered on faded murals, images of faces that felt eerily familiar. A child playing in a field. A woman laughing under a fig tree. A man staring into the sea. Each one stirred something inside Eli, as though he had lived pieces of them in dreams he could not fully recall. At the very end of the alley stood a wooden door. It was old, weather-worn, moss gathering at the base. But in the center, there was a lock shaped like a sun. Around it, carved in looping script, were the words, "Return not to where you began, but to where you truly are." He reached for the key. It slid in smoothly, turned with a quiet click, and the door creaked open. Inside, he found a small stone chamber lit by dozens of hanging lanterns. Each one glowed with a different hue, soft greens, warm ambers, deep blues. At the center of the room was a shallow pool, its surface glass still, reflecting the ceiling like a mirrored sky. Eli stepped toward it. In the reflection, he didn't just see himself. He saw every version of him from the journey, walking through fields, standing beneath the Duomo, dancing in Venice, holding the lantern in Umbria. They weren't separate, they were one. From the side of the room, a quiet voice spoke. "Memory is not a collection. It's a reunion." He turned and saw no one. But he understood. The journey had not been about discovery. It had been about remembering. Not places, but pieces of himself. He knelt by the pool and placed the silver key on the stone beside it. The water shimmered, and the lanterns above dimmed, one by one, until only the soft blue one remained. Its glow reflected in his eyes. Then, the room gently dissolved, walls fading, light softening. He found himself back outside, standing on the edge of the sea. The sky had turned violet. Waves lapped at the shore, and the silhouette of Vesuvius stood against the dusk like a dream not yet finished. In the distance, a boat waited. The same boat that had carried him through Venice. The same one that had pulled him from sleep at the start. The journey was almost whole. He stepped aboard. The sea cradled him. The stars blinked awake. Chapter 13. The boat rocked gently as the world around Eli faded to gold. When his eyes opened, he was once again in Tuscany, in the same field where it had all begun. Morning light spilled over the hills, painting the wheat in hues of honey and fire. The air was rich with dew and wildflowers, and a soft breeze rustled the tall grass like a whisper from an old friend. He stood slowly, stretching as though from a long, restful sleep. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. The farmhouse still waited in the distance, its windows glowing with early sun. Birds circled lazily overhead. The same cypress trees lined the horizon. But the moment felt fuller, more alive. As though time had opened something wide inside him. In his pocket, the silver key was gone. So was the lantern. But in their place, there was peace. He began walking toward the farmhouse. The path was familiar now, the curve of the hill, the rhythm of his steps, the sound of bees drifting between blooms. Each detail felt like a reunion, like the last piece of a song returning to its first note. At the front steps of the house sat a weathered notebook. His. He opened it. The pages were no longer blank. They were filled with sketches, pressed flowers, charcoal scenes of every chapter, gondolas in moonlight, Roman ruins bathed in gold, the light of Florence, cliffs of Amalfi, stars over Verona, the Dolomite peaks. And on the final page, written in his own hand, a single sentence. I am here. He smiled. The farmhouse door opened on its own. Inside, the table was set with bread, cheese, olives, and a cup of warm tea that steamed gently in the golden light. A breeze moved through the open windows, carrying the scent of rosemary and old wood. He sat. Outside, the hills shifted with light. The world was quiet, not silent, but perfectly still in its rhythm. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every bird call, every sip of tea, was exactly where it belonged. Eli closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to feel. His journey had not been one of escape. It had been a return. To the places, yes, but more importantly, to himself. To the quiet. To presence. To that small, enduring light within. And now, in this final chapter, he wasn't dreaming. He was home. The end. Thank you for dreaming through Italy with Eli. Eli's Dream Journey Through Canada. Chapter 1. Eli felt the moment the dream began, not in the dramatic plunge of reality slipping away, but in the quiet shift of sound and scent. The distant hum of traffic was replaced by the soft rustle of wind through pine. His eyes opened to find himself standing along the shores of Vancouver's English Bay. Early morning light glistened on the water, and the cool coastal air kissed his cheeks. Behind him, the glass towers of downtown Vancouver shimmered like modern mountains under a pale blue sky. He stepped forward, his shoes crunching against the fine gravel of the seawall path. Around him, joggers and cyclists moved with a rhythm that felt rehearsed, as if this was a city choreographed in calm. Stanley Park loomed ahead, a green island of serenity nestled within the city, its towering trees guarding its secrets. As Eli wandered deeper into the park, the scents of cedar, wet earth, and blooming cherry blossoms filled the air. The canopy overhead filtered sunlight into golden specks that danced at his feet. He paused at Brockton Point, where a collection of towering totem poles stood like ancient sentinels. Each one told a story, of eagles, whales, thunderbirds, and ancestral spirits, carved into vibrant wood. Eli felt a gentle reverence wash over him. He ran his fingers along the grooves of one pole, feeling the craft, the memory, the voice of time itself. As the morning warmed, he made his way toward Granville Island. The public market buzzed with quiet life. Vendors offered up fresh-baked bread, glossy berries, and steaming cups of dark-roasted coffee. Eli chose a pastry filled with berries and a drink infused with maple, not too sweet, but smooth and warm, like a whispered song. He sat by the harbor and watched a group of children chase seagulls while a street violinist played a melody so tender it seemed to shape the air itself. Behind him, an artist painted the scene, boats rocking gently in the harbor, mountains in the distance, a sky that felt like it had no ceiling. As the sun dipped into the Pacific, painting the sky in coral and gold, Eli felt a breeze pass through the trees, not cold, but cool with intention. He leaned back, his eyes fluttering closed, and let the maple-sweet wind carry him deeper into the dream. Chapter 2. When Eli opened his eyes again, he was on the deck of a ferry. The sea around him was cloaked in fog, and the horizon was invisible, as though the world had shrunk to just this moment. The ferry hummed softly, cutting a path through glassy water that gently swelled beneath the weight of morning mist. He leaned against the railing and caught a glimpse of motion in the distance, the graceful arc of an orca's fin breaking the surface. A pod followed in silence, surfacing and diving like shadows stitched into the sea. The sight stirred something ancient in him, as if he had seen this before in a dream within a dream. Vancouver Island rose ahead, a silhouette of dark greens and grays. Once docked, Eli stepped off the boat and into a land that smelled of moss, cedar, and rain. The Pacific Rim Highway curved like a ribbon through dense rainforest. He drove, though he didn't know how the car appeared, letting the curves of the road guide him deeper into nature's embrace. At Cathedral Grove, he stepped out and walked into a realm of giants. Towering Douglas firs stretched hundreds of feet into the air, some over 800 years old. Their trunks were wide enough to hide a small room behind. He tilted his head back until he could see no sky, only the layered branches reaching into eternity. The forest was alive with sound, the drip of dew from fern fronds, the chirp of hidden birds, the slow rustling breath of the canopy above. He felt small, but not insignificant, rather, like a welcome guest in a timeless temple. By late afternoon, he arrived in Tofino, a coastal town that felt more like a whisper than a place. Surfers danced across waves, children built castles in damp sand, and ravens croaked from driftwood posts. He wandered to Chesterman Beach, where the tide stretched the horizon, and the sand gleamed like bronze. His room that night was a small cedar cabin with a wood stove and a window facing the sea. He sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, and listened as the rain began to fall, slow at first, then steady, a lullaby of droplets on leaves and rooftop. The fire cracked. The ocean sang. Somewhere beneath the waves, he imagined the orcas still swimming, still speaking in deep, melodic tones. And just like that, sleep took him again. Chapter 3. Eli's dream shifted once more, and now he found himself seated by a large train window. The famed Rocky Mountaineer rolled along a track that carved through snow-capped mountains. Vast wilderness stretched in all directions, pine-covered valleys, glaciers catching sunlight, rivers running fierce and cold. He pressed his forehead to the glass, his breath fogging a soft circle. Outside, elk grazed in meadows bathed in morning light. Eagles soared above cliffs. The train itself felt timeless, polished wood paneling, soft leather seats, the gentle clink of teacups as attendants served breakfast with knowing smiles. They passed spiral tunnels and crossed bridges that hovered over rushing rivers. Time lost its grip. It could have been morning or late afternoon, hours or days. Eli simply existed, witness to beauty that needed no name. The train paused in Lake Louise, and Eli stepped down. The lake was even more stunning than any photograph, water so turquoise it felt unreal, ringed by snow-dusted peaks and whispering spruce trees. He walked the shoreline slowly, breathing deeply. The air was thin, but invigorating. He dipped his fingers into the lake. It was glacial cold, but clean and pure. In Banff, he wandered the charming streets, browsed cozy bookstores, and took a cable car up Sulphur Mountain, where the world below looked like a painting in motion. He ended the day at Banff Upper Hot Springs, submerged in warm, healing water with mountains all around and a twilight sky above. A mountain goat appeared near the edge of the hill, just as he stepped out to dry. It stood still for a long time, watching him with curious eyes before it turned and disappeared into the trees. Eli stood there, wrapped in a towel, feeling the heat of the springs fade from his skin and the cold air wrap gently around his shoulders. The stars were just beginning to appear, and he felt the dream deepen once more, not ending, but simply turning the page. Chapter 4. Eli awoke beneath a sky painted in prairie gold. The train was gone, replaced by wide-open fields swaying like oceans of wheat. He stood on the edge of a hill overlooking the vastness of Alberta's plains, where the sun hung low and bright, casting long shadows and gilding every blade of grass. He walked toward the city of Calgary, where the prairie met glass and steel. Its skyline rose suddenly, as if sculpted by wind and ambition. The Bow River cut through the city like a living vein, lined with bike trails and parks. Eli joined a crowd moving toward the Calgary Stampede grounds, the city's heart beating in rodeo rhythm. The air buzzed with excitement and the scent of sweet kettle corn and fresh hay. He wandered through the fairgrounds where laughter echoed from the Ferris wheel and horses paraded in polished gear. Cowboys and cowgirls, weathered and smiling, moved with confident grace. A child offered Eli a maple taffy stick, and he thanked her, savoring the sweet crystallized syrup melting on his tongue. He took a seat in the arena stands as the evening rodeo began. The crowd roared as riders challenged gravity, clinging to bucking broncos in midair spectacles of power and grace. Drums pounded and boots stomped, the rhythm of the stampede ran through Eli's chest like a second heartbeat. Later, with the sun bleeding into the horizon, a country band played under a canopy of string lights. Families swayed in circles, couples spun barefoot in the grass, and old men tapped their hats in time to the beat. Eli danced with strangers who felt like cousins, laughing freely. The music was a language older than speech. As the sky darkened fully, fireworks erupted overhead. Bursts of red, blue, and gold bloomed into the night. Eli tilted his head back and let the explosions reflect in his eyes. A child beside him whispered, "It's like magic rain," and Eli smiled, knowing she was right. As the last echo faded into the hills, Eli walked the quiet river path back toward the edge of the city. The night was cool and gentle, and the golden prairie whispered his name as he drifted once again into sleep. Chapter 5. This time, Eli found himself walking through fields under a sky so vast it felt like a cathedral. The sun was just rising over Saskatchewan, casting a soft, amber light that shimmered across the prairie like silk. The wheat fields rolled like waves, whispering in the wind. He followed a dirt path that led to a small city nestled along a river, Saskatoon. The South Saskatchewan River glistened beneath a network of graceful bridges. As he crossed one, the city unfolded around him, clean, quiet, and humming with gentle life. Trees lined the banks like guardians. Canoes drifted on the water. The occasional jogger nodded in peaceful solidarity. He rented a bike and followed the Mewason Trail, a ribbon of green that hugged the river's curves. It led him past sculpture gardens, community orchards, and sunlit parks. The quiet was not empty, it was rich, filled with the chirp of prairie birds and the rustle of long grass. In the afternoon, he visited a cultural center focused on the Plains Cree and Métis peoples. There, he saw beadwork so intricate it shimmered like stars. He listened to the recorded voice of an elder tell stories of wind spirits, trickster crows, and rivers that remember. Eli felt something open in his chest, a connection, a reverence, a stillness. For lunch, he visited a farmer's market beside a red-bricked warehouse filled with music and laughter. He bit into warm bannock topped with Saskatoon berry jam. The flavor was sweet and earthy, the berries carrying a taste like memory. Children played nearby, chasing bubbles blown by a street performer with silver hair. The man winked at Eli and said, "The bubbles remember where you've been. That's why they float." As dusk settled, Eli stood on the Broadway Bridge and watched the city glow gold. Lights flickered on in cottages, cafes, and concert halls. A gentle wind stirred, and the sky began to shift. At first, just faint green wisps, but then brighter, stronger. The northern lights painted the heavens above Saskatoon. They shimmered and waved as if dancing to music only the sky could hear. People gathered along the riverbanks, phones forgotten, mouths open in quiet awe. Eli lay in the grass, the lights above, the river beside him, the earth below. He felt wrapped in light, in peace, in wonder. And so, without needing to move, he dreamed again. Chapter 6. The lights above became the stars of another sky, one stretched above the gentle city of Winnipeg. Eli awoke in the heart of the Forks, where two rivers met, the Red and the Assiniboine. It was morning, crisp and full of potential. Around him, the old train station bustled with new life. The market pulsed with smells, cinnamon buns, pierogies, cedar tea, and sounds, fiddle tunes, soft jazz, First Nations drumming. He wandered slowly, tasting here, listening there, soaking in the harmony of cultures layered like the rings of a tree. He found himself drawn toward a structure like no other, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. It rose from the earth like a stone-and-glass mountain, its spire reaching for the sky. Inside, he wandered through exhibitions of resilience, resistance, and hope. His reflection stared back at him from panels etched with stories of struggle, not to shame, but to inspire. One quote stayed with him, "Hope is the thing with feathers." He looked up to see feathers suspended in glass, and for a moment, he imagined they fluttered in the dream breeze. Outside, he walked the paths of the Assiniboine Park, where snowy owls perched in silence and families picnicked beneath copper trees. He rode a miniature train with laughing children and sat in a sculpture garden where the wind played music through hanging steel chimes. Evening brought a new scene, the exchange district. Old warehouses, now reborn into cafes, lofts, and studios, buzzed with youthful energy. Poets read under streetlights. A saxophone whispered from an upstairs window. A couple danced in an alleyway to a song only they could hear. Eli followed the sound of drums into a small theater, where a puppet show was beginning. The tale was simple, a Metis girl lost in a forest who finds her way home by following the voice of her ancestors. The puppets were carved wood and cloth, but the story felt real and deep and true. As the audience applauded, Eli felt the warmth of connection, across cultures, across time, across dreams. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and deliberate, covering the cobblestones in a hush. He walked along the river, the city glowing behind him. Somewhere, a lullaby played on a flute. The snowflakes touched his cheeks like blessings, and as he closed his eyes, the dream took him once more, northward, always deeper. Chapter 7. Eli's next dream opened with silence, the kind of silence that felt sacred. He was bundled in a thick parka, standing on frozen ground that stretched in all directions. A small town lay behind him, sleepy and snow-covered, Churchill, Manitoba. The tundra was stark and stunning. Wind carried the scent of ice and something wilder, the musk of unseen creatures. He boarded a tundra buggy, a strange, lumbering vehicle with giant wheels designed to navigate the Arctic's frozen terrain. The guide, a woman with deep-set eyes and a voice like river stones, said, "We're in polar bear country now. Be still. Be open." They rumbled across icy trails under a slate-colored sky. A few kilometers in, the guide raised a hand. Everyone stilled. From behind a ridge of snow, a polar bear emerged. It moved with grace, despite its size, a ghost of muscle and fur. It sniffed the air, turning toward them. For a moment, its eyes met Eli's. Time suspended. The bear blinked once, then continued walking, snow crunching beneath its massive paws. "That one's a wanderer," the guide said. "They dream while walking. Just like you." Eli sat in stillness as the tundra buggy continued its quiet journey. They saw more bears, and a few Arctic foxes darting through the snow like spirits. The cold bit at his cheeks, but it was invigorating, cleansing. He touched his breath in the air like it was something tangible. That night, he stayed in a small lodge overlooking the frozen Hudson Bay. The sky began to shift, slowly, then suddenly. The aurora borealis unfolded above him in ripples of green, pink, and violet. The lights pulsed, spiraled, and danced in silence. It was like watching music written across the sky. Eli lay back in the snow, unafraid of the cold. He felt tears sting his eyes, not from sadness but from awe. The northern lights weren't just beautiful, they were alive. He imagined ancient travelers reading messages in the sky, stories told without words. Somewhere behind him, a drum began to beat softly. He turned to find the guide sitting beside a small fire, eyes closed, tapping a rhythm older than time. She sang softly in Cree, the notes low and comforting. Eli didn't understand the words, but he felt them settle into his bones. As the fire crackled and the aurora danced, he closed his eyes once more, the heartbeat of the earth carrying him into deeper sleep. Chapter 8. When Eli next opened his eyes, he was afloat in silence, not in snow this time, but on still water. He sat in a wooden canoe, gliding through the misty embrace of Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario. The lake was a mirror, perfectly reflecting the tall pines and soft clouds above. The air smelled of pine needles, loam, and the faint sweetness of morning dew. A loon called, its voice long and haunting, echoing across the water. Eli dipped his paddle gently, barely rippling the surface. The mist curled like spirits as he glided through narrow channels and open bays, his body relaxing with every soft stroke. On the shore, he stepped out onto moss-covered stone and hiked a winding trail through forest alive with birdsong. He saw deer, their eyes wide and calm, and squirrels chittering above. Sunlight filtered through amber leaves, dappling the ground in gold. By afternoon, he arrived in Toronto, Ontario's largest city, a pulse of energy after the calm of nature. Yet even here, the dream did not rush. He wandered the harbourfront, where sailboats bobbed on Lake Ontario. Street performers juggled, danced, and played music from every corner of the world. In Kensington Market, colors exploded, murals, spices, fabrics, and accents from a dozen countries mingled in a joyful kaleidoscope. Eli sipped chai from one vendor, then tasted Caribbean patties from another. Everything was flavor, story, and soul. Later, he climbed the CN Tower. From the top, the city spread beneath him like a board game, small, ordered, alive. But what drew his eye was the lake, stretching far into the horizon, mirroring the sky in deep, endless blue. That evening, he walked through High Park, where fireflies danced above grassy trails. Families picnicked. Musicians played softly under oaks. He sat by a sculpture of migrating geese, their wings frozen in bronze, and felt the subtle ache of movement, of time, of change. As night fell, the lights of Toronto sparkled like constellations brought down to earth. Eli closed his eyes, his breath slowing with the rhythm of the streetcars, footsteps, laughter, and lake wind. Chapter 9. The sound came before the sight, a deep, endless roar that seemed to rise from the ground. Eli stood at the edge of a path lined with flower beds in full bloom. Ahead, the mist rose like smoke from a sacred altar. Then he saw it, Niagara Falls. 3 massive waterfalls thundered over the cliff, their combined force staggering. Horseshoe Falls curved like the edge of the world, crashing into a churning basin below. Rainbows hovered in the mist, bending light into blessing. Eli felt the spray on his face and stepped closer. He joined a small group boarding a boat, donning the classic red poncho. As they approached the falls, the roar became a language, ancient, powerful, clear. It was the sound of water never ending, of stories being told over and over. The boat entered the mist, and for a moment, everything disappeared. He couldn't see the sky, the water, or the boat. Just white. Just sound. He closed his eyes and let it wash through him. The falls were cleansing him, of fear, of doubt, of time itself. Back on land, he explored Niagara-on-the-Lake, a storybook town with horse-drawn carriages, ivy-covered inns, and bakeries that smelled like cinnamon and memory. He sampled ice wine in a vineyard that sloped gently toward the horizon and wandered through gardens where monarch butterflies floated like petals on air. At night, he stayed in a hotel room overlooking the illuminated falls. The water was lit in deep purples, icy blues, and warm ambers. He sat on the balcony, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping herbal tea. A woman nearby sang softly in French. A child asked, "Do the falls ever stop?" and the mother answered, "Not even in dreams." As the night deepened, Eli let the roar become a lullaby. The power of the falls faded into rhythm, into heartbeat, into breath. And with that, he slept again. Chapter 10. Eli's dream took him through time before place. He was walking cobblestone streets in light that shimmered like candle flame, golden and flickering. The air smelled of fresh bread, old stone, and softly falling snow. He looked around and realized he was in old Quebec City, a place where history didn't feel like the past, but like a living story told in every building, every breath. He wandered through narrow lanes where wrought iron balconies curled like lace above arched windows. Gas lamps lined the streets, glowing warmly in the early evening. Street musicians played accordions, and soft laughter echoed from stone cafes. The language of the city was French, but Eli didn't need to translate it. The meaning was in the mood, the eyes, the slow pace of every smile. He passed under the arched gate of the old town walls and made his way to Place Royale, where snow dusted the rooftops like powdered sugar. Tourists sipped mulled cider, and children fed the pigeons that cooed and strutted like tiny princes. Eli stopped to listen to a violinist whose notes rose into the cold air like smoke from a hearth. The melody made his eyes sting, not from sadness, but from a kind of deep remembering. Drawn uphill, he climbed toward Chateau Frontenac, its copper roof catching the last light of the sun like the crown of a sleeping giant. Inside, the warmth wrapped around him like velvet. A bellhop nodded and said, "Welcome," before pointing him toward a lounge with roaring fireplaces and old bookshelves. Eli curled into a chair and read from a leather-bound book he didn't recognize, but which seemed to know him. It was full of love letters from winters past, stories of travelers who had found something eternal between snowstorms and sips of cocoa. Outside again, he took a horse-drawn carriage through the Quartier Petit Champlain, where shop windows glowed with amber light and evergreen garlands hung from every door. The snow had begun to fall more steadily now, catching in his lashes and softening every sound. The driver hummed a lullaby in French, and Eli leaned back, watching the lanterns blur as the dream moved gently forward. In that moment, he understood that this city didn't just preserve history, it kept it warm. And in doing so, it had room for his story, too. Chapter 11. The dream did not carry Eli far, just downriver to a city full of fire and jazz, Montreal. He arrived in the early evening, when the sky was deep blue and the streets shimmered with recent rain. The scent of espresso, baked bread, and distant cigarette smoke mingled in the air. It felt like a secret waiting to be shared. The old stone alleys of old Montreal glowed with life. Couples walked arm in arm under umbrellas, and string lights danced above patios filled with steaming bowls of poutine and laughter in 2 languages. He wandered the banks of the St. Lawrence River, past silver sculptures and children playing in puddles. Up on Mount Royal, he joined a silent crowd of dreamers gazing out at the skyline below. Montreal sparkled like a constellation pulled down from the heavens and scattered across the earth. From the summit, the city's rhythm became clear, not frantic, but full, like a well-kept heartbeat. Later, in the plateau, he followed the pulse of distant saxophones to a jazz club tucked behind an old bookshop. A single red light hung above the door. Inside, everything was music. A quartet played without a single wasted note. The singer had a voice like midnight velvet, low, smoky, and full of stories. Eli sat in the back, sipping a bitter espresso, letting the music wrap around him. People whispered and kissed and closed their eyes as the music curled through the air like incense. He didn't know how long he stayed, an hour, a lifetime. During a break, the singer came to sit beside him. "First time here?" she asked in French-accented English. "In this life, maybe," he answered. She smiled, as though she understood, and reached out to adjust the scarf around his neck. "Well then," she whispered, "let it become part of you." Outside, snow began again. Not the soft, delicate flakes of Quebec, but heavier, rounder ones that thudded gently on rooftops and turned alleyways into rivers of silver. As he walked back through Rue Saint-Denis, the city seemed to exhale around him, music, memory, and warmth blending into one. By the time he reached his room, he was not tired, but content. Montreal had not drained him, it had filled him, note by note, smile by smile. He curled beneath a heavy blanket and let the dream draw him eastward once more, into the gentle embrace of the sea. Chapter 12. The waves were calling when Eli arrived next. He stood on the rocky cliffs of Peggy's Cove, Nova Scotia, where the iconic lighthouse stood like a sentinel over the Atlantic. The ocean wind wrapped him in salt and softness, and the horizon stretched so far it seemed to bend time itself. He wandered the weathered fishing village, where lobster traps lined the docks and colorful houses clung to the hills like sea-touched dreams. A fisherman named Noel invited Eli into his kitchen for chowder, thick, steaming, rich with memory. They didn't speak much. The sea did all the talking, crashing outside the window in a slow, familiar rhythm. In Halifax, Eli walked along the waterfront boardwalk where tall ships swayed and musicians strummed folk ballads about sailors, storms, and homecomings. A small child offered him a shell, saying, "It whispers if you listen right." And so he held it to his ear, and heard not the ocean, but a lullaby. He crossed the Confederation Bridge into Prince Edward Island, where the earth was red and soft, and the sky hung low and gentle. Fields rolled in greens and golds, and lupins bloomed in violet clusters along winding country roads. He visited Green Gables, wherein might have once walked, and imagined himself writing letters by oil lamp. That night, in a bed and breakfast by the shore, the wind hummed through the cracks of old wooden walls. A storm brewed over the sea, lightning briefly revealing the curve of the waves. But inside, the fire crackled, and the owners sang Gaelic songs in the kitchen, songs about leaving, returning, and never really being gone. Eli dreamed of boats on the edge of the world, and seagulls that told secrets, and fishermen who knew the names of every star. Chapter 13, The Light of Newfoundland. His final chapter began in quiet stillness, standing on the edge of Cape Spear, the easternmost point in North America. The wind here was stronger, wilder. The sea stretched beyond comprehension, and Eli stood with it, the lighthouse rising behind him like a monument to all that came before. The cliffs below were jagged, dramatic, ancient. The waves crashed with conviction, but the sky above was clear. Puffin soared in dove, and a humpback whale breached far off the coast, its silverback catching the morning sun. In St. John's, colorful row houses climbed the steep hills like painted thoughts. Eli walked the Jellybean Row, taking in every vibrant hue, reds like laughter, blues like longing, yellows like music. He sat in a harbor pub, where the musicians didn't play for the people, but with them. A fiddle, a bowron drum, a voice full of salt and sky. The room danced. Even those who didn't rise from their chairs tapped their feet. A woman next to him passed him a spoon and said, "Keep rhythm or get out." He laughed and joined in. Later, in Trinity, a coastal village where time moved like fog, Eli stayed in a cottage near the cliffs. He hiked through the tablelands, where the earth was bare, ancient, and wise, orange rock from the mantle of the earth itself. No trees grew there, only quiet, and the sound of the wind whispering truths too old to name. That night, as he sat watching the stars prick into the velvet sky, a man sat beside him with a lantern. "You've come far," he said. Eli nodded. "I think I'm waking up." The man smiled. "Maybe. But the dream's part of you now." And with that, the man vanished. The lantern remained, glowing gently. Eli stood, the stars above, the Atlantic breathing below, and whispered his thanks, to the dream, to Canada, to the quiet parts of himself he had rediscovered along the way. The wind carried it out to sea. And when Eli opened his eyes again, his room was still. But his heart was full, of oceans and forests, cities and stars, mountains and music. And the dream had never really ended. The end. Thank you for traveling with Eli to Canada.